But the Pharmacy Council is now requiring pharmacists to outline annual plans to pursue cultural safety in order to be recertified. So not just to be, so it's a la in lots of ways the real estate agency. The council claims that to be culturally safe, pharmacists need to reflect on their own cultural identity, biases, and the potential power imbalance. Well, I've just gone through the potential power imbalance. Cultural safety, says the Free Speech Union, is a highly contested concept, and there is a suggestion that this is ideology gone mad. To talk about that, we're joined by Nick Hahn, the Free Speech Union Education Partnership Manager, and he joins us now. Nick, welcome to the show. Love to have you on again.
Thanks.
I've just said I felt culturally unsafe anytime I go into a pharmacy to purchase particular goods, but I assume it's not my cultural safety that the Pharmacy Council's trying to look after. Is that right?
Well, you'd like to think that they'd be looking after everyone's best interests, but it does seem to be skewed towards, I guess, those groups we would consider the more vulnerable, those minority groups, and particularly Māori. And I think if you look at the competence standards on the Pharmacy Council website, you begin to get a really clear picture of what actually they are trying to roll out here. So
what are they trying to roll out?
Well, pretty significant ideological kind of takeover. And that may sound like a very strong word, but you start getting into some of their statements, and they're talking about things like, obviously, the sort of softer statements, which we probably got used to hearing, like we're here to sort of honour the obligations of the treaty in thought, word, and deed, right? Well, okay, we're getting a lot of that, but then it gets more specific, and I think it's important we not overlook that statement, though, because it's talking about the thought and word, not just deed, right? We're not just talking about the settlement negotiations or the treaty negotiations and things like that from the 1990s onwards. We're talking about actually a worldview. We're talking about an ideology, and it gets more specific. So it actually talks about how, based on the health and disability system review that was done a few years ago, the Pharmacy Council want to implement across the sector this Mātauranga Māori approach, and that it would be embedded into the health system. But, Pharmacy Council want to do this first, but others would be doing it too. So Mātauranga Māori, if people remember the Listener 7 controversy, is all about Māori knowledge, traditional perspectives on knowledge, traditional knowledge practices and beliefs. So what are they saying? They're saying that they want to actually, in sort of pharmacology, they want to bring in a Māori knowledge base or a knowledge approach. What does that mean, though? I mean, we're talking about the scientific method on one hand, and then we're talking about indigenous knowledge or traditional beliefs on the other. I mean, is there a way to reconcile these two things? And what kind of consultation has actually taken place in order for us to have this being proposed and then for people to accept it? It's not just about pharmacists, it's about the user too, right? It's about the person that goes into the pharmacy, like you're talking about. Are we confident that we're getting, a science-based approach to pharmacy, or are we going to be getting something that is now a hybrid? And I think that there are major questions being raised by the concepts that they're introducing here.
Listen, I am preparing for this particular interview today. Went onto the Pharmacy Council website, and I came across their most recently published, as I'm sure you've read too, Nick, governance charter, which I imagine is the basis for your concerns here. And this is the governance charter that overpins or is the vision of the strategic plan. Well, not so much the strategic plan, but the vision, the ideology, the values that the Pharmacy Council seeks to promote. Listen, this could have been written by a radical Maori activist, Nick. It is all about Maori and nothing about any other ethnicity in this country.
Well, my suspicion is that it probably was written by someone of that description. It's got, two Pākehā, I think a chairman and the CEO with their names attached at the end of it, but I don't think it was written by them. This is my guess, and it really is quite, I think, disturbing, because we're talking about like the scientific method here, right? If we're going to have Matauranga Māori and a Te Ao Māori worldview incorporated into pharmacy or
Yeah,
into the practice of
yeah.
pharmacists, then that means that the veneration of your ancestors and their knowledge and their beliefs isn't actually sort of subject to scrutiny, because that's not part of a particular sort of Te Ao Māori worldview, right? You have to venerate your ancestors and the claims that they made about the world. Now, the scientific method does the opposite. The scientific method says there are no sacred cows. Everything is up for questioning. Everything's up to be challenged, and that is how we can move forward with better forms, of knowledge, improved forms of knowledge. So, how do you bring those two things together? I don't see that intellectually. There is a possibility to marry those two things, and yet that's what's being imposed here, and it is being imposed. The language, while it might seem vague in places and very euphemistic, is actually quite dictatorial. I mean, again, I don't want to sound, like I'm overblowing it here, but it really is quite emphatic. They're not giving you any options here. They're saying this is what we're doing. This is the direction we're heading in. And when I say,
know, it's extraordinary.
the direction, that what they're saying is there is a cultural continuum, and we're heading along that continuum in a certain direction towards a hybrid. And I don't even know if it's a hybrid model really, because once you do away with the scientific method and you introduce, the sort of Te Ao Māori worldview as we might understand it, say pre-colonization, then we're not able to kind of pick and choose. It basically undermines the scientific method, which is fundamental to pharmacists, right, and what they do.
Yes, and it's ironic in actual fact, because on one hand it is all about taking, as you say, a Te Ao Māori view, particularly in governance of the Pharmacy Council. But on the other hand, they turn around and say the council's first duty is to act in the interest of the public ahead of the profession. So I'm assuming the public is all New Zealanders, not just simply Māori New Zealanders.
Well, of course, and they have a duty of care. I mean, a very, very serious duty of care.
They do indeed.
And one of the things that they talk about is this model that they're using, which is the whare ki tapui, which is effectively a mat. And they're saying, in conceptual terms, that the mat is woven together with different strands, and they talk about two different strands. Again, I find it very reductive. They talk about two different ideologies, right? This is literally the wording they use, ideologies.
Mm.
One is a Western ideology, and the other is Te Ao Māori ideology. So they're not even, trying to couch this in sort of euphemistic language anymore. They're actually being quite specific. They're saying these are two different ideologies that will be woven together. So at that point, we have to say, hold on a second, this is about public safety. Because if you're going to take this language seriously, which is what they're saying pharmacists need to do, then it's going to have presumably some very real world impacts on people who go into pharmacies. Now, if it's not, then it's just tokenism, and it's a complete, waste of time, and it's a whole lot of virtue signaling. But which is it? And how do pharmacists not follow it and yet retain their licenses? There isn't an option to do that.
No. The other thing is there's a section on what they call proportionate universalism. I mean, sorry, I almost said that out loud. I mean, how ridiculous. Proportionate universalism, which suggests that Maori have disproportionately worse health outcomes, so therefore they need special care and attention. This is the Pharmacy Council's views. And yet there are lots of ethnicities of this country who have poor outcomes. I've just talked about Pacific Island peoples. They're not mentioned by the Pharmacy Council at all, nor are poor whites. It is only one ethnicity that should occupy the primacy for proportionate universalism from the Pharmacy Council. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, and this is not this document that I've been referring to, the competence standards. It's not an attempt to respect the sort of the democratic diversity that exists in our population. It's not actually about cultural awareness. Sure, it's important to know things about people, where they come from, what might be motivating them, so you can make more informed sort of decisions in terms of their treatment, their care. But this is really the imposition of a particular worldview, and they've spelt it out. They've said it's an ideology. That's literally what they've said.
Yeah.
So my view is, of course, and I think most people would agree, that if you want to go see a traditional healer, you're welcome to go and do that. No one's stopping you. Now, there could be some serious ramifications if that person gets that treatment wrong, but you do have that right. But if you're going in and you're expecting a scientific approach, you're expecting the kind of rigor that the scientific method offers from a pharmacist, but you're not actually getting that, then that's a major concern. That should be, sending up a lot of red flags. And
Well,
so we,
mm.
I don't want to get too substantive about this stuff, because ultimately people can decide whether they want to go down the route of a traditional healer or not. But it can't be imposed on people who are trained in the scientific method, and they have to have some way of pushing back, and they're not allowing that. The Pharmacy Council are not allowing pharmacists an option here. If you want to stock natural sort of remedies on your shelves in a pharmacy, that's fine. But you can't claim that it somehow withstood the robust, scrutiny of the scientific method. And yet this is what we're getting here. And so you're getting this cultural safety talk. What does that mean? I mean, they don't even give you a succinct definition. They're just basically saying it's a way for an organization, an institution to impose a philosophy on people.